Uh, Good morning, colleagues. Welcome to the first technical session of the UNEP Working Group on Nitrogen. My name is Liu Ning. I'm a program officer of the South to Sea Pollution Unit based in Nairobi. And today we are very happy to have several scientists who will share their insights on the social dimensions on nitrogen management. This is the first technical session for the UNEP working group on nitrogen. The UNEP working group on nitrogen was set up in 2020 to help the implementation of United Nations Environment Assembly resolution on sustainable nitrogen management. As of today, we have 96 member states nominated focal points to this working group. We wish that through a number of online meetings and seminars like today's technical session, to share scientific knowledge and also to discuss with audience about the policy intervention at national, regional, and global level. Now I hand the floor to Annie. Annie, please. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So I have a few slides to show you just to sort of get us started. If you give me a moment, I'll just share my screen. Okay, hopefully you can see that all fine. So yeah, it's delighted to welcome you all today. It's a really valuable opportunity for us to share ideas and experiences on this important topic. So my name is Annie Yang from the University of Edinburgh, and I was closely involved in the nitrogen policy work under UKRI, the South Asian Nitrogen Hub. And since I've been able to continue that work with working with UNEP and the government of Sri Lanka to develop a national action plan for sustainable nitrogen management. So my role here today is to moderate the session and just provide some initial background as to why we chose this important theme. So just to begin, I'd like to give a quick overview of the agenda and some of the context. So we have global experts, as was just said, who will be sharing practical insights and experiences on addressing nitrogen challenges, particularly through the social dimension lens. So looking at human health and diet, agriculture and governance, while also showcasing innovative approaches for knowledge exchange and awareness, raising awareness with examples from Romania. So all of these will hopefully provide concrete lessons and insights for developing national action plans. So just to the agenda, in keeping with the theme of this session, we also want to encourage full audience participation. So at certain points in this session, there'll be opportunities for you to share your perspectives on the issues we're discussing, as much as you feel comfortable in sharing. So please have your phones ready for that part. But yeah, we have the 4 speakers today, each bringing a different perspective around air pollution, around diet, governance and policy, and then experiences from how to put that into practice from Romania. And then after these talks, there'll be further space for audience engagement, and then following that, panel discussion. So let me begin by providing some background. So I'm sure many of you will have seen this figure before, or at least a version of it. And all of these 3 figures come from 3 different studies, but the main feature of these is to represent the 9 planetary boundaries that define the safe operating space for humanity within the Earth's system. These boundaries represent critical thresholds for various Earth system processes, where if crossed, could lead to abrupt or irreversible environmental changes posing risks to humankind. So even in 2009, it was indicated that we crossed those boundaries for nitrogen for biochemical flows. And if we look to the study from 2023, we can see that since then, 6 boundaries have since been crossed. Yet these boundaries are interrelated processes, they're not discrete within that complex Earth system of ours. So understanding that interplay between the boundaries is key in science and in practice, and never more so when we're talking about nitrogen management. Yet what is missing here is how does crossing these thresholds, these different boundaries, what does that mean for society and those communities? So here we have what's called the wages. So this was by Mark Sutton and colleagues. It was just to indicate the ways that nitrogen emissions can threaten our environment. So reactive nitrogen compounds have been accumulating in our environment over several decades. And whilst these are essential, too much in one place is not a good thing either. So since these have doubled since the 1970s, these present a significant issue across the globe. And these threaten the environment in a multitude of ways, from water, air, greenhouse gases, to our ecosystems and soils. And by adding this second bubble, just to further emphasize society, where we emphasize those links in how nitrogen threatens not only the environment, but with that, people. So when it comes to research around nitrogen, the natural sciences have dominated its study, often focusing on soil chemistry and plant production and atmospheric modelling and environmental impacts. And whilst that's all necessary, David Cantor with colleagues wrote a paper about why nitrogen research needs the social sciences, highlighting the social sciences, how that helps us to examine the social processes and phenomena linking ecological and human systems, and thus nitrogen pollution. So this includes a whole number of disciplines, of course, from demography, for economics, for education, culture. And what we need to do is move the nitrogen agenda forward to reflect its increasing relevance in these different areas, and that's for society and within policy too. Today, we're sharing just a few examples to give a sense of what this field can offer. So though we won't be able to go in that much depth, hopefully this will trigger new questions and insights and opportunities for taking these conversations and action forward. So this will be my last slide before we move on to the audience participation. And this will just help us to understand sustainable nitrogen management. And I think it helps to do that through a socio-ecological systems lens. So here's an example. An SES, socio-ecological system, is an integrated adaptive representation of the social and ecological components and processes of a system. The dynamics of that interconnected system are demonstrated here. That goes across different scales and different dimensions. And of course, this makes it complex. Yet nonetheless, using this kind of perspective can help us appreciate the interconnectedness between society and the environment. It helps us understand the resilience and adaptability in managing resources, and ultimately, hopefully, help us design policies that are more responsive, inclusive, and effective in addressing environmental risk, particularly again in the case of when we're dealing with nitrogen. So this perspective is central to today's session. It highlights the importance of interdisciplinary research, as well as integrated cross-sector coordination for tackling sustainable nitrogen management. So I will stop sharing there for a moment. I think we may have Mihai online. I'm just checking. Mihai,
Hi.
maybe.
Hi, hello.
Maybe sorry, we had to change the ordering slightly, but do you want to provide your introduction and then we'll go to the audience participation?
Yes, but I have to start with my apologies. Actually, this morning we also have to be part at the level of European Union to Nitrates Committee, and it is a session with a vote, so I had to stay there a bit. So anyway, here I am, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It is my pleasure to welcome you. From my side and also from my colleague co-chair Purvajara Machandran, this is the first technical session of the UNEP working group on nitrogen, on social dimensions of sustainable nitrogen management. UN is destined to look over global multilateral problems and to seek solutions. While nitrogen is impacting pollution, biodiversity, recognize nitrogen as a major contributor to pollution, biodiversity loss, and climate change. But if we shift the perspective to humans and we recognize the nitrogen role in population access to clean water and food and its impact in human health, then we have a different perspective, and this is about this meeting today. While millions of people are depending on small-scale agriculture, nitrogen management is also linked with basic income in local communities. Furthermore, developing nitrogen policies, namely national action plans, should consider gender balance, vulnerable groups, meaning young and small farmers and persons with disabilities, and promote engagement of marginalized persons and groups. Public consultations and grievance mechanisms for the National Action Plan should be also an important trait and should be considered while developing national action plans. Finally, environment protection and social aspects are having something in common. It's about solidarity. This being said, I wish you good luck with the discussions, and my special thanks and congratulations to Anastasia Young for being involved in this meeting. Back to you.
Thank you, Mihai. Really appreciate that. Okay, so we're just going to move on to the segment where we wanted to welcome your participation. So I don't know if you're familiar with Mentimeter. This is a similar kind of app. So what you would need to do is to scan the QR code that you see on your screen with your phone, or you may want to go to wooclap.com and enter the code that you see here. So hopefully that, I'll give everyone a minute to do that. If you have any trouble, just mention it in the chat. So each time, I'll go on to the questions in a moment, but each time you give your answer, if you select your answer or type it in and then just press submit at the bottom of the screen, then it should be recorded. And let's just see if technology will be on our side today. So I'll move to the question. Hopefully everyone's managed to log in here. I can see 15 people have managed to do so. So just as a first question to get us started and get familiar with this, I was just curious about where you were joining us from today. So if you'd like to just sort of click where you are on the map, and then if you submit at the bottom, we should start seeing where everyone is located. Okay, you can see that coming up now. It's working, that's good. Okay, so we've got a good spread, especially considering the time zones. Fantastic. As you can see here, if you still haven't managed to log on, you can go to WooClap and then enter the code. Brilliant. I'll just make sure everyone's had a chance to enter their location here. Brilliant. So I'll just move on to the next question. So hopefully you'll see it on your device anyway, but I'll just read it out. So in your view, who is most affected by the mismanagement of nitrogen? So if you just type a word or two words, who you think is most affected by the mismanagement of nitrogen? And there's a few examples there too. If you'd like to just type in your answer and submit. Okay, we've got a couple of answers in so far. So everyone, future generations, local communities, small-scale farmers. You'll see where a word is more popular or appear bigger. So everyone, certainly communities, industry. So yeah, no, this is a good exercise, I think. I mean, I don't think you're wrong there. Nitrogen mismanagement does affect everyone. It affects our soils, it affects our air, affects our biodiversity, affects food security. Fantastic. Okay, so I'll just move on to the next question. So in terms of the social dimensions of sustainable nitrogen management, what topic would you like to know more about? Okay, I think that might be an answer from the previous question. But public consultations, someone's written here. So in terms of social dimensions of sustainable nitrogen management, what topic would you be interested in learning more about? The role of industries, the behavior change, health impacts, lives, with people's lives, the power balance. Okay, so this is encouraging because whilst we won't be covering all of these, we certainly will be covering some of these topics within the talks that we have coming up. And if those topics that people have mentioned have not been covered, then it gives us reason to look to cover those topics in future discussions. Okay, there's a lot coming in now. That's great to see. Possible collaborations, socio-technical change, community well-being, small communities' role, perfect research, and to see the big picture in intersectionality. Fantastic. Okay, so I think we'll leave it there. We'll come back to WUCLAT after we've heard the talks today. I'll just stop sharing for a moment, but thank you all for participating with that, just to have an opportunity to see what people have, how familiar people are with the topic and what people are thinking about in these regards. What I just quickly want to do, I'll just share my screen before I pass on to our next speaker. I'll just provide an introduction firstly. Okay, there we go. These are the questions we've just gone through. So yes, I'm just going to introduce the speakers one at a time. So firstly, we have Dr. Salma Singh, who is from the Institute of Forest Management in Bhopal, India. Dr. Singh specializes in air quality, climate change and environmental management, and is a measurement specialist. Her research is focused on reactive nitrogen emissions, ammonia fluxes, and the agriculture and air pollution nexus, as well as the rural-urban air quality linkages, especially in India. And Dr. Singh will talk to us today on fertilizer to fine particles, the reactive nitrogen challenge. So I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll pass over to Dr. Singh for her talk.
Thank you, Annie. I'll share my screen first. Can you see the screen or?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you.
That's a full screen? Okay.
Yeah, full screen.
So good morning, everyone. As Annie mentioned, I'm Salma Singh. I'm from Indian Institute of Forest Management in Bhopal, India. First of all, thank you for this opportunity to address the important issue of reactive nitrogen led by UNEP Nitrogen Working Group. And I'm deeply grateful to the host and organizers for inviting me to this important technical session. Today, I want to take you on a journey that connects every farmer or every residence actually from rural to urban area. And a journey I have mentioned here, the fertilizer to fine particles. Particles here is related to air quality, air pollution. And this is not just about the nitrogen impact on society. I'll be covering mostly about how communities, especially aware, informed, and gender-inclusive community, have potential to transform the environmental challenge into opportunities for social empowerment and sustainable development. So let's first start with the reactive nitrogen, which we all know that the good and bad of reactive nitrogen. So it's a blessing and curse for us. Essentially, we get the food and energy from reactive nitrogen, and it's dangerous when it escapes from the environment into the environment. So there are three major kind of reactive nitrogen species I will be covering among many, which are important for atmospheric perspective. Ammonia, which major sources coming from agriculture activities, nitrogen oxides, especially NOx, coming from transport and industry, and then nitrous oxide coming from mainly, which is also a greenhouse gas coming from the agricultural activity. So what you see here is this graph on the left shows basically the global nitrogen creation by several pathways. And I really want you to focus on the Haber-Bosch production of ammonia from fertilizer. So that's a gray dotted line on the top. And just a second. Yeah. So this is actually, this graph is showing that steep the increase from 1962 to 2020, how the fertilizer creation, reactive nitrogen, especially the fertilizer creation, has increased and has gone to exponential growth in this fertilizer production creation. I mean, and then on right side, what you see is on the right, what you see is basically the global map from the Yu et al. And colleagues from a science paper I had chosen, which actually reveals the environmental cost of this massive increase of the fertilizer or agricultural activity. So by just focusing on the right, if you can see here, just the right part of the map, I don't know if, yeah, just the right part of the map, where what we are seeing here, A panel, the top panel is in total reactive nitrogen changing from 1990 to 2013. The middle panel is showing the ammonia changes from 1990 to 2013. And the bottom panel is showing the NOx, which is nitrogen oxide, dioxide, and NO, which is changing from the nitrogen 1990 to 2013. And what I really want you to focus here is see the difference. And the red color is showing the increase. And one very important highlight here is the area which you can see changing is the Southeast Asia and the South Asia, which have the most changes here. So the question we all face is how do we keep feeding the world while managing the environmental consequences of these unprecedented nitrogen mobilization? So coming from nitrogen perspective, now I want to touch on the fertilizer, and I want to start with this a few lines I found on a study, which I really wanted to mention here to highlight the importance of fertilizer, even though we all know that without applying a fertilizer, India would have needed to cultivate an additional 63 million hectares to match the production achieved by using fertilizers, because there is a little possibility of expanding cultivated areas. This is an indirect idea of the positive socio-economic effect of fertilizer use. So we all understand this, but it's also important to acknowledge the fact. So how will we face the significant efficiency crisis, even though we have a huge fertilizer creation growth happening, but we face a huge efficiency gap. only 30 to 50% of applied nitrogen actually feeds our crop, and the rest actually goes into waste, which can be air, groundwater, and soil. And these nitrogen going into these three different part is actually degrading the air quality. So air quality will be degrading, water quality, and then the soil itself. And what you see here, there's another example, as this graph is showing. It's basically nitrogen loss as ammonia from after urea fertilizer applied in agriculture field. And you can see the percentage of nitrogen loss is ranging from, again, 30% to 15% in North America. And again, the South Asia showing the highest percentage here. Able to move this. Okay. Now I take you to the journey of the fertilizer to particulate air pollution. That's what I want to focus today here, is how the fertilizer actually contributing to the air quality, which is like individual cost of the overuse of fertilizer or the reactive nitrogen in terms of fertilizer application. So ammonia is one of the reactive nitrogen gas I mentioned earlier. That comes from the agriculture field, and then it reacts with the nitrogen dioxide, reactive nitrogen species, and other acidic reactive nitrogen other acidic species coming from different urban sources, and mostly from transport and vehicles, and then they react and they form particulate matter. That's what I'm referring here, PM 2.5. 2.5 is basically showing the diameter of that particle, and they impact the air quality in a rural area and urban area both. So the diagram illustrates the process. Actually, ammonia rises from rural sources, meets acid, and meets these sources from the urban area. This creates an invisible farm to city connection that gives an origin to rural-urban blame game. And where stubble burning and other sources are seen as a culprit, and ultimately farmers are being blamed without understanding the full picture and even sharing the information with the farmers about the invisible damage happening from fertilizer and overuse. The particles are so small, they penetrate deep into human lungs and enter the bloodstream, causing cardiovascular and respiratory diseases. And the global health implications are staggering. Agriculture has become, as you can see in the slide, that on the top panel, I have mentioned that it has become the largest, this is a result from a study, contributor to PM 2.5. That's again air quality. For a simplicity, we say for an air pollution problem worldwide, leading to 3.3 million premature deaths annually. And this finding from Leo and colleagues at the comprehensive 2019 study represents one of the most significant environmental health challenges of our time. However, there is a substantial opportunity for intervention. Research by the second study I have mentioned here, Pauser and colleagues, demonstrate that a 50% reduction of agriculture emission could prevent mortality attributable to air pollution by approximately 250,000 people annually worldwide. So I wanted to show the problem and challenges at global level. Now I'm zooming into India, why this matters globally. We are an agricultural economy, and we have a growing population and increasing food energy demand. Fertilizer powerhouse, as a, we are the second producer, actually second largest food producer globally, and then world's second largest fertilizer consumer and third largest producer with consumption pattern. So India's experience matter because what works or fails here affect global food system, environmental health, and provides critical lessons for other national facing a similar population, agriculture, environmental pressures. So the solution we develop must balance food security and environmental sustainability at scale. So I'm taking you to the different policy landscape in India. I have chosen a couple of policy to mention here. So India has implemented diverse nitrogen management policies over 2 decades, from pricing reforms like nutrient-based subsidies to efficiency innovations like neem-coated urea, and alternatively approaches including natural farming and precision agriculture. These policies achieved impressive scale: 100% national urea coverage through neem coating, 140 million farmers reached through soil health cards, and then 600,000 farmers transforming to zero synthetic nitrogen in Andhra Pradesh, which is a state in South India. These numbers demonstrate India as implementation capacity across diverse implementation. However, implementation reveals a critical insight. Achieving policy scale differs fundamentally from achieving behavioral transformation. Technical solution requires deeper community engagement to drive actual change in farming practices. This is where India's institutional asset, which is Krishi Vigyan Kendra, it's a Hindi term, so it translates as a agriculture science center, which has a network of 731 community extension center. While not central to, this is not currently central to nitrogen policies, this model represents significant policies, potential of community-centered management. So I wanted to also, based on the different policies we have, I wanted to focus on one community-led scheme, which is again Andhra Pradesh in South India, which they adopted zero natural farming zero natural farming practices. And in basically 600,000 farmers, they came across from 13 districts, adopted these farming practices and completely eliminating synthetic nitrogen while maintaining yields and improving soil health. This represents one of the world's transition to sustainable nitrogen management, and transformative element is actually this was led by women self-help group, leading this change, combining traditional knowledge with the scientific validation and government supports. These images show women as farmers, you can see here, engaging in knowledge sharing, working in diverse healthy fields and training others. This model demonstrates that when communities, particularly women, have ownership, agency, and appropriate institutional support, they can achieve what policy intervention alone cannot: complete elimination of reactive nitrogen sources while maintaining the agricultural productivity as well. And another is the precision farming. I won't take much time about this. Recently, we introduced, the Government of India has introduced the Drone Didi technology empowerment. So basically, Didi is sister. So there is a women's self-help group given the drones for the precision agriculture and entrepreneurship. And these have largely transformed the manual labors to the tech entrepreneurs. So from the learning perspective, I would say that policy interventions versus outcome, we have to really see that comprehensive schemes achieved scale, but behavioral change requires deeper community engagement. As we have seen for the different policies like soil health card, where the idea is great, but to reach the better implementation, to reach the better result, I think we need a deeper community engagement. Success factors identified: community-led ownership will be community-led initiatives have seen successes. Proven model exists, as I mentioned about the Andhra Pradesh model. And based on that, these experiences and their potential global implications, here are actionable strategies that can be adapted to different national contexts. First, align nitrogen fertilizer policies with environmental outcome, integrating air quality, water protection, and soil health consideration into agriculture policy framework. Second, make invisible environmental cost visible through information sharing and awareness campaign that connect fertilizer practices to health outcome. Third, engage all stakeholders in shared responsibility, ensuring farmers, agribusinesses, and policymakers understand their respective roles. Fourth, scale-proven community-led models with gender inclusiveness, building on existing women's network and leadership structure. Fifth, balance food security with the sustainability through integrated policy approaches that addresses both objectives simultaneously. This vision is straightforward knowledge leads to empowered community, which creates global impact through replicable and scalable solution. So with that, I would end my talk and thank you. And I just want to end my talk with this message: from fertilizer to fine particles. When we make the invisible visible, either for the resident or farmers, any stakeholder, I think that and put communities at the center, reactive nitrogen challenge become opportunity for the sustainable transformation. So let's work together and learn from each other to scale community-centered solution globally. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Singh. That was really informative and really wonderful to hear about these examples from India and some models, but also lessons to take on where things could be working better if there's more engagement and consideration around behaviour and input into communities. So I would like to welcome our next speaker, which will be Dr. Roberto Puccetti. He is an assistant professor at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. His work explores the intersection of climate change, pollution, and public health. His current research examines how air, water pollution shape human health in the context of planetary health. A lot of health there. So today he will talk to us on Too Much of a Good Thing, water pollution, diet, and health impacts. Over to you, Dr. Puccetti.
Thank you very much, Annie. And now the usual awkward moment of sharing the screen. Is that okay?
Perfect, we can see, yeah.
So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. And thank you for inviting me to this session. I wanted to change a little bit, to shift a little bit the point of view here. Usually when we talk about nitrogen management, we tend to focus on the supply side, which are the producers, and agriculture. But here I wanted to shift to the demand side, the food that we eat, because that actually is what drives the production. So I wanted to talk about diet and how that can affect nitrogen management. Yep. It doesn't switch. Okay. So at the global stage, the global demand of protein-rich and animal-based foods drives the inefficient use of nitrogen. And actually, the production of livestock requires the production of feed crops, which rely on the massive use of fertilizers, which then pollute air, soil, and water. And this, as Annie showed earlier, contributes to the planetary boundary being exceeded and transgressed. Nitrogen management can also impacts on the SDGs, and more the main ones are the SDG on food security, clean water, sustainable consumption, climate action, marine life, and terrestrial ecosystems. But in addition to the global significance, there is also a local relevance, and especially the pollution caused by runoff of fertilizers and livestock manure pollutes waterways, and then we drink that water, and also that water affects aquatic life, that pollution. The choices of food by individuals and communities can directly reduce this pollution. And the use of public health awareness and dietary behavior change can help in achieving a sustainable nitrogen reduction goals. Nitrogen has also a direct impact on health. So if we could reduce the consumption of foods that are responsible for a high pollution and high use of nitrogen toward foods that require less nitrogen, like plant-based foods, there is a body of research that clearly shows that there is a positive impact on health outcomes, such as cardiovascular diseases, stroke, cancer, and type 2 diabetes. But in addition to food, there is the problem of nitrate polluting drinking water. And there is very likely an association of nitrate in drinking water and stomach cancer and colorectal cancer. And there are some indications, although still controversial, of possible link to other cancers. This is still kind of controversial because research is not, we don't have enough research on that. We need to research more. But the trend is toward a possible link to other cancers as well. So there is a direct impact on health. Now, what are the drivers of the food nitrogen footprint? Well, first of all, the type of food, as I mentioned. Animal products, here I'm showing the eutrophying emissions. So these are the excess nutrients that run off into the water. And these nutrients are mostly nitrate and phosphate, but most of everything nitrate. That's the main one. And this causes eutrophication, which is the overgrowth of these algae, which can kill aquatic life and also affect fishing industry. But also there are some algae that are directly toxic to humans. So you can see here in this graph that animal-based foods produce a high level of eutrophying emissions, whereas plant-based foods produce less eutrophying emissions. So if we could reduce the consumption of animal-based foods, we could contribute to lower the eutrophying emissions. Then there are farming practices. So if we use inefficient practices, what happens is that up to 60% or even 80% of reactive nitrogen is lost into the environment. That means that we are applying a lot of nitrogen, up to 80%, that is not used by plants to grow. It's just wasted into the environment, into waterways, air, and soil. And then we have food loss and waste. So food loss happens along the supply chains and is prevalent in low-income countries, whereas food waste happens at the consumer level, especially at the level of household. If we focus on food waste, 60% of food is wasted in the household, and this is prevalent in high-income countries. I put middle-income countries here because they're literally in the middle, meaning that for some of them, the food loss is more important, it's prevalent, but for others, is the food waste that is prevalent. What I found interesting in this report is that if we focus on household waste, the difference between middle-income countries and high-income countries is really small. It's less than 10%. Now, I wanted to focus your attention on these two numbers, because if we sum them, we reach 32%. That means that about one-third of food produced globally is wasted or lost. That translates into a lot of nitrogen that we're using to produce food that we will never eat. That's a massive waste of resources and a massive waste of money, in addition to the pollution that is caused. But if we could tackle this problem, we could also have a positive impact on SDG 12, which is the one on responsible consumption and production. Now, the change doesn't happen just with science. There is also society is important. And the drivers for change or barriers in society are listed here. So the drivers are the awareness of the impact on climate and environment. This is particularly relevant or particularly felt by young generations. The awareness of the effect on health, policy incentives, I will show you a few examples later, affordable pricing and convenience and availability. So is that sustainable food available at the corner or not? But there are, of course, barriers like industry lobbying, because some industries might be against the change, established habits, cultural norms, equity concerns, and high prices. So basically, this means that the nitrogen management is not just about technical improvements, but it's also about governance, values, and fairness. But there are good news. The good news is that dietary shifts are happening. Here are some examples where in the UK, Germany, and France, over the past few decades, the consumption of red meat and processed food meat has gone down. You can see that there is an increase in poultry consumption, but strictly speaking, from the nitrogen point of view, I showed earlier that the production of poultry requires less nitrogen. So yes, the poultry consumption has increased, but that's still a gain because the red meat consumption has gone down. And then there is this example of in the USA, where in New York, in hospitals, plant-based food is the default choice for inpatients. And then there are some examples of policies like Meatless Monday that happens globally, hospital defaults that I just showed, school programs. So in canteens, the main choices are plant-based foods. Dietary guidelines. So we have, in some countries, there are dietary guidelines that highlight the benefits of plant-based foods, and we find them from Norway to Sri Lanka. Public procurements, that's a powerful tool, because with public procurements, we can create a market or expand the market of plant-based foods. And if the market grows, then industry and producers might be encouraged to jump in. And then support to innovation, which is what the EU is trying to do with the Green Deal. We need to also to integrate society and science. And here is an example. This is a report that was published for the European Union. And here the researchers investigated 144 scenarios to reduce nitrogen loss. And in 11 scenarios, they were able to show a 50% reduction of nitrogen, and these scenarios involved dietary changes. The most balanced and probably easily achievable scenario was the one that had these three approaches together: halving meat and dairy consumption, involving farm and food chain management, and reducing the overconsumption and protein intake. Now, one thing that is important to keep in mind here is that these policies must be bound to the context. So this kind of intervention is recommended and probably more or less easily achievable in high-income countries. But in low-income populations, actually decreasing meat consumption might not be recommended. Actually, in those settings, it might be recommended to increase a little bit the meat consumption and dairy consumption to achieve nutrition security. So we need to be really mindful of the context when we create policies. Now, some key lessons for steps forward. We need to tear down the silos. So we need to link policies and connect food, environment, and health policies. We need to use multiple tools. So not just campaigns, but also taxes, subsidies, and procurement standards. And we need to tackle equity. So we need to be sure that sustainable foods are affordable and available. And the path ahead, at the level of governance, we need to coordinate across the whole food systems. Here I echo a little bit what Sonia just said. And innovation, at the level of innovation, support new sustainable foods and practices. So it's important here that at the level of innovation and governance, we really include all the partners from producers to consumers. And we consult with them, we involve them, and especially with farmers, we shouldn't leave them behind. And at the research level, we need more research on the behavioral of habit change and communication studies at the level of communication, how to make plant-based foods more attractive, more desirable, desirable, but also how to counteract the communication from the industry that doesn't want to change, that wants to keep promoting the consumption of meat, for instance. We need more research on equity and on the cultural meaning of food. And then we need to monitor and track the progress toward healthy diets and nitrogen reduction. So some of these elements can actually be included in the national action plans from the consumption point of view. And I would say that the bottom line here is that nitrogen is not just a technical challenge. It's really about people, diets, and fairness. And if we integrate these social dimensions into policy, we can make dietary shifts a win-win for health and the environment. And with this, thank you. And yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Roberto Pichetti, for that fascinating talk. Really sort of embracing the systems thinking and all of this, and a really nice follow on from the first talk. So without further ado, I'll just introduce our next speaker. So next up we have Dr. William San Martin, who's an assistant professor of global environmental science, technology and governance at Worcester Polytechnic Institute in the US. Dr. San Martin is a contributing author of the forthcoming International Nitrogen Assessment and leads the governance working group on the International Nitrogen Network Group. And he will be talking to us today on why social dimensions decide the future of nitrogen governance. Over to you.
Thank you, Annie.
Martin.
Thank you. If you give me a couple of seconds to do the magic here.
Of course. Yeah, we can see that. Perfect.
Do that.
Showing icons at the bottom.
Excellent. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, good night for me. It's almost 4 a.m. here in Boston. And thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Let me begin with the core argument that I would like to make in this presentation. Nitrogen policies succeed or fail depending on whether they account for equity, participation, and the recognition of diverse farmers and stakeholders. When these social dimensions are overlooked, the outcome is not just inequity, it's backlash, it's protest, and non-compliance. Social dimensions are not secondary, they define governance outcomes. Therefore, addressing them is both ethics and practical risk management. In my talk today, I want to show how these dynamics emerge in farmer protest and what lessons these conflicts reveal about the deeper social foundations and deficits of nitrogen governance. So how does this play out in practice? Let me start with a guiding question. Why do nitrogen policies so often trigger conflict? From Europe to South Asia, let me stop the caption because the machine is not really good at translating accents. From Europe to South Asia, farmer mobilizations have become critical governance challenges. These protests are not isolated incidents, they are signals that policies are colliding with deeper social realities. And as countries advance national action plans, these conflicts are likely to become more frequent and more consequential. This also points to a deeper challenge. The current policy landscape contains critical blind spots and gaps in how social dimensions are understood and considered. To address this, I'll structure my talk in 3 parts. First, the blind spots in high-level nitrogen governance. Second, the multiple ways social dimensions already shape nitrogen governance beyond protest alone. And finally, how farmer protests reveal deeper social dynamics that must be addressed. And I'll close with a few recommendations to address these issues. So let's start with part 1. There are here 3 entry points that I would like to highlight. The first one, at the global level, UN resolutions on nitrogen management and current progress on national action plans have acknowledged critical social aspects such as health, awareness, consumer behavior, and participation, right? All of those aspects are critical. However, social dimensions are often and still broad and aspirational, and we often lack practical guidance or concrete models to achieve these goals. Second, let's turn to policy research. This graph comes from work led by my colleague David Cantor, which categorizes agricultural nitrogen policies across 3 groups of countries: OECD on the left, non-OECD high nitrogen consumers in the middle, and non-OECD low nitrogen consumers on the right. And I would like to draw your attention to the dark green bars, which are pro-nitrogen policies, and the orange bars, which are commerce policies. Pro-nitrogen policies explicitly promote fertilizer production or use, for example, in terms of subsidies, trade incentives, or programs that expand fertilizer access and lower cost. And commerce policies shape market conditions, the supply chain, trade, and distribution of fertilizers. Together, these 2 categories represent more than 2/3 of agricultural nitrogen policies worldwide, and an even larger share in non-OECD countries, as we can see on the right bar. This data show agricultural policies still incentivize fertilizer use rather than supporting sustainable transitions. While regulatory policies to curb overuse or mitigate impacts have emerged in recent decades, they remain a small minority in the global landscape. As these and other studies emphasize, progress is constrained not only by the dominance of pro-nitrogen paradigms, but also by how policies approach pollution. Most rely on changing farmer behavior, which is a difficult task given limited monitoring capacity, and more importantly for my argument, given our limited understanding of the cultural and behavioral dimensions of nutrient management. So let's look now at some regional evidence. The only regional systematic review of nitrogen policies so far is focused on South Asia, led by our moderator here, Annie Yang. So thank you, Annie, for that work. The study found that only about 9% of nitrogen-related policies in South Asia are integrative, meaning they're addressing multiple things, multiple sectors, and using multiple policy instruments. Such policies are valuable because they reflect the multiple dimensions of nitrogen management more realistically. Yet they remain very limited, and the share of policies that explicitly embed equity, livelihoods, or meaningful participation is even smaller. This highlights a persistence gap between how we design policy and the behavioral change needed for effective governance. One example that tries to move in the right direction is Bangladesh National 3R strategy for waste management. I don't have that much time here to go over in detail, but its novelty lies in engaging social dimensions, from building public awareness and recognizing the informal recycling sector to addressing gender issues and linking waste management with agriculture, which is one of the points that Roberto was pointing out. The key point here is that despite challenges of implementation that of course exist, the 3R strategy shows how regulatory frameworks can begin to embed equity and livelihoods across sectors, but such examples remain rare in the global policy landscape. So to summarize these blind spots, critical social dimensions of sustainable nitrogen management highlighted in UN resolutions, the SDGs, and in the work of the UNEP Nitrogen Working Group guidelines remain understudied in research and underdeveloped in policy. Beyond some key examples, there is still no systematic global or regional analysis of how these dimensions work in policy design and implementation. So let me now turn to the second part of my talk, the social dimensions that shape nitrogen governance. Although we still lack systematic reviews, case studies already show the many different ways social factors matter. This figure brings some of these dimensions together, from farmer decision-making and subsidy politics to trust, gender, lobbying, and policy integration. What this research teaches is clear. Nitrogen policies are not just technical instruments. They are embedded in social perceptions, institutional histories, and political struggles, and they succeed or fail depending on how they interact with farmers, consumers, and institutions. The key point is that these examples show Naturian policies are constantly shaped by social contestation across each of these domains. And this helps us connect back to my initial question, why do Naturian policies trigger conflict? The answer is that protests and conflict are not isolated events. They are the moments when all of these underlying dimensions, identities, economic shocks, distrust, inequalities, rise to the surface at once, turning social blind spots into open confrontation. In the next session, I'll show how farmer protests expose these deeper social foundations. Farmer-led movements have long played a critical role in shaping agriculture, contesting state policies and corporate power. In recent years, however, these protests have grown. Farmers have resisted Naturian regulations in the Netherlands, opposed pro-market reforms in India, and contested agrochemical bans in Sri Lanka. While the motivations differ, the underlying perception is often the same, that new state policies threaten livelihoods, identities, or the means of production. There are a few regional features that research has identified in some of these cases, and we see Europe on the right side of the iceberg here and South Asia on the left. In Europe, protests are often triggered by tightening rules. Farmers describe agribashing, feeling unfairly blamed and excluded from policy, feeding populist politics and distrust between farmers, scientists, and EU institutions. In South Asia, farmers frame their mobilizations around class, caste, gender, and food sovereignty issues, resisting the erosion of state protections, with women and marginalized groups playing key but often invisibilized roles. Despite these differences, protests share common elements: distrust, insecurity of livelihoods, inequality, and marginalization in decision-making. So what do these protests ultimately teach us? They're both a stress test. They expose the fragility of Naturian policies under social pressure, and they're also the tip of an iceberg, revealing deeper tensions around livelihoods, trust, and recognition. And this takes us back again to the question, why do Naturian policies so often trigger conflict? And my answer here is because conflict functions as an alarm system. Protests signal the governance deficits and expose the social foundations that determine whether governance is legitimate and sustainable. In this sense, conflict is not an anomaly, but a symptom of deeper failures in governance. So let me walk you through some of the key lessons step by step. And think about this figure as a kind of climbing set of stairs. On the very first level, at the bottom, we learn that conflict emerges from deeply competing visions, interests, and paradigms of how Naturian should be governed. These are not just technical disagreements, they're social and political struggles shaped by fears, values, and identity. Good governance, therefore, requires working with these competing views. On the second level, we see why these visions often feel irreconcilable. Structural inequalities in resources, knowledge, and decision-making foster distrust and lack of recognition. On the third level, we learn that policies succeed or fail depending on whether they institutionalize equity, participation, and recognition. And on the top level, the central lesson: successful Naturian governance must anticipate both biophysical and sociopolitical challenges: climate, social, cultural, economic, or institutional. Addressing social dimensions is therefore not just about ethics, it's about practical risk management. So let me close with a few recommendations, and I'm going to go here left to right. Participatory decision-making structures. Build institutional channels to engage farmers and stakeholders early in policy design and implementation. So social barriers are identified and addressed in formal institutional channels and not when they emerge in the streets. Second, develop targeted support so that the financial and social burden of change does not depend on individual resources or social preferences. Third, value farmer and indigenous knowledge alongside scientific expertise. Embed local knowledge into extension services, monitoring systems, and decision-making bodies. And fourth, bring social scientists and social experts from local research institutions, technicians, and extension service professionals that work directly with farmers into the policy process. That knowledge can help design policies that can be more legitimate and more likely to succeed in practice. So to conclude, if nitrogen policies are to endure, they must be designed not only around biophysical targets, but also with social and institutional processes that guarantee fairness, participation, and recognition. So thank you all. I'm very happy to answer any questions. And if you're interested, all references cited on here are in my presentation, which will be available after this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. San Martin. That was really informative and gives us plenty of food for thought. And what we will do, we'll take written questions at the end of the talks. We'll have another little engagement with WooClap, but then yeah. So if you do have questions, just hang on to them, and we'll yeah, and then you can share those later to all our speakers. So with that, I will now introduce our next and final speaker for today. So next up, so far we've heard from 3 scientists working in different areas, but obviously with common themes being discussed. But our next speaker is different. We have Miss Lavinia Todor, sorry if I'm saying the surname of Todorova, who is the Knowledge Transfer Coordinator at Romania's Ministry of Environment, Water and Forests. And she leads national efforts to address sustainable nitrogen management. And she'll talk to us today on knowledge transfer to farmers in Romania. So over to you, Ms. Todorova.
Thank you, Annie, for this wonderful presentation. I'm going to put the presentation on my screen. Is it okay?
Yes, we can see that.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Lavinia Todorova, working in the Ministry of Environment, Waters and Forests as Knowledge Transfer Coordinator. It's a pleasure to join you today at the first technical session of the UNEP Working Group on Nitrogen. I'm excited to share how Romania is advancing knowledge transfer to farmers, especially through a social inclusive lens. As in other countries, agriculture in Romania is a major contributor to nitrogen pollution through nitrates and ammonia. While we develop and implement a code of good agricultural practices, which is voluntary for farmers, and an action program that is mandatory for them, much work needs to be done for our waters to be suitable for drinking in all rural areas. At this moment, a third of our communes do not have drinkable water due to nitrates contamination. Our nitrogen use efficiency at farm level is around 60%, and this results in environmental pollution, negative health impacts at local level, and economic losses for farmers. To tackle this, we've built in the ministry a robust organizational model to address not just the technical and the policy aspects of nitrogen management, but the social ones too. We work closely with the World Bank to develop and improve our social framework, to identify vulnerable groups and tailor our interventions accordingly. This includes a grievance mechanism. And social and environmental experts dedicated to the tasks. Robust indicators are included, assessed and reported. Methodologies to identify the needs of vulnerable groups are in place, and a behavioral specialist was contracted in order to guide us. At the heart of our approach is a 3-part knowledge transfer framework that goes beyond the technical solutions. First, we design the policy. After that, we promote the practices through the awareness campaign. And second, we foster farmer-to-farmer learning through knowledge transfer networks. At third, we support pollution-reducing techniques that are practical and scalable through the grants. The knowledge transfer networks, the KTNs, include informal communal level training, farmer discussion groups, and an advisory hub staffed with trained facilitators from farmer organizations. These aren't just technical spaces they are also social spaces because farmers share experiences, ask questions, and build trust. And the involvement of farmer organization is very important in the process for building trust. Here you see two photos. One is presenting the theoretical part of the group, the informal meeting where the farmers are discussing, and the other part is on the farm where they are presented with the equipment most of the time, how it works, the economics involved in this, and how it's benefiting the environment, let's say, from implementing these techniques. Each FDG involves around 20 farmers, and from these 20 farmers, around 6 farmers are women farmers. In this photo, it's really difficult to spot them, but they are there, I show you. Public authorities representatives also participate to ensure alignment with the policy. We've adapted the group discussions for farmers schedules to accommodate childcare needs for women farmers. There are women farmers only groups, and we've included farmers with disabilities in our outreach. We use behavioral insights to support women's active engagement and conduct third-party reviews to ensure accountability and responsiveness, including the level of the adoption of good agricultural practices promoted through the farmer groups. We also do surveys and analyses tailored at gender level. Social inclusion is a cornerstone of our work. We've prioritized women and young farmers in our demonstrative farm grant schemes, and I'm proud to say that we've exceeded our target of 35% women farmer participation, and we reach over 70%. For all of our project, we conduct public consultation at the local level and environmental and social screening. And we also included non-sexual harassment policies and work safety policies in all of our contracts and the farmer contracts for all the supply chain. We see that women and young farmers are not just as, we see the women and young farmers not just as grant beneficiaries, but as agents of change within their communities. We consider that by empowering women and young farmers through targeted grants and training, not only promote equity, but we also accelerate the adoption of sustainable nitrogen management practices, ensuring that the next generation of farmers is equipped to reduce nutrient runoff and improve soil health. Regarding the national awareness campaign, we've launched it beyond the training, and we tailored to rural realities. We use adapted messaging, local champions, and even school competition to engage families and community. It's not just about information, it's about empowerment. We also tackle consumers who are also targeted to complete the farm to fork cycle and reward environmentally responsible farmers. Through the contest, the school children prepared for us lots of drawings after they understand some parts of the cycle of some parts of nitrogen management. We also had a very important action with the caravan where we basically showed, we went into the rural areas and we showed the people that the water there is actually contaminated with nitrates, because it's very difficult to speak to somebody about something that cannot be seen, cannot be smelled, and cannot be tasted. Our guiding principle is simple: assess, adapt, promote, empower. We assess needs through surveys. We identify barriers through research. We adapt our tools continuously and promote best practices and empower farmers, especially young and women, and consumers to lead the change. We consider that by combining peer learning, expert advisory services, and behavioral insights, Romania's knowledge transfer model creates a resilient ecosystem where farmers can make informed decisions about nitrogen use. Thank you for your attention, and thank you all for organizing this event and for giving me the opportunity to be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Todorova. I think it was, really helpful to hear about real-world examples of how this is being done in Romania, to really consider the sort of social dimensions and put that at the forefront in the work that you're doing to address sustainable nitrogen management. It's really inspiring. So we'll come to questions again in a moment, and I think we can use the Q&A function. I see one question already in there, but before we go to that, just realised I didn't have my camera on. Before we go to that, I was just going to take us back to the WooClap just to, again, just to get some insights from all of the participants here. So let me share my screen again quickly before. If you could stop sharing, Lavinia, that'd be great. I'll just put this on my screen. So hopefully you can see my screen that we saw earlier. And for those of you who maybe joined a bit later, to take part, you can go to wooclap.com and you just put in this code, and then you can participate in the questions. So what I'll do, I'll just move to the next question. So again, if you can have your phones at the ready, if that's what you're using. So we just thought it would be interesting to have this question to share. Can you see that on the screen? I don't know if it's working. Hopefully you can see that. So from the WooClap, so the question is, in 1 or 2 words, describe what you see as the biggest social challenge for sustainable nitrogen management. So given what we've heard from the talk today, I wonder if it might have changed your mind about what you think is the biggest issues, but I'm curious to see what people have to say here. So if you can enter your answers onto using the app. We'll see if this works. It worked earlier, but we'll see if it works now. Okay. Interesting. So we've got hope you can see those words coming up, if not on your device, but on the screen here. But we've added polarization, policy development, stakeholder engagement. I mean, perhaps that's why, incentivization, farmer adoption. A lot of these things take resource, they take effort. It's not, but it's a challenge, but extremely necessary one. Collaborative policy making, farmer adoption, costs and benefits. Interesting. So yeah, so definitely a common thing. Public understanding, that's obviously come up a few times in the talks we've heard today, that it's as much about perceptions as it is anything, and making the invisible visible in some cases. But also farmer involvement, policy understanding, affordable alternatives, the right incentives to create behavior change with all of that. Fantastic. Okay, so I'm just going to move on to the next question. So from today's session, what key insights stood out the most to you? So if there was a particular topic, idea that came up in the talks that we've heard, or maybe, yeah, what stood out the most to you? What resonated with you? Okay, interesting. So what we were learning about from Dr. Singh's talk about some of the policies that are in place in India, soil health cards, about particular matter and sort of air pollution issues, governance, knowledge transfer. I think that's this is the police streams, but I think maybe the policy streams being quantified. So that was some of the work that begun with David Cantor and colleagues, and we also did something similar for South Asia. The benefits of gender inclusion in policy, knowledge transfer. Oh yeah, you can add that love hearts if you agree to some of the ones that have already been posted here. It's really good to get a sense of what has resonated with you all today. nitrogen impacts on health. Of course, we've heard quite a lot on that today, particularly from air and for diet as well. Different working groups, conflicts, which was so. I mean, keeping that in mind, this might also help you to think about what questions you might want to put towards our speakers. I'll give it another moment or two. But yeah, it's good that these things were coming through to everyone. Okay, so I think we'll finish there with the WooClap, but thank you for participating on that if you could. Sorry if there was technical issues, but I think it was good to give it a go. So what we'll do, we'll just move on to the Q&A segment of our session today. So if I could welcome the speakers to put their screens back on. I'll stop sharing my screen here. Oh, I don't think I ever did share my screen in the end. Perfect. Welcome back. I'm just going to see what questions we have on the Q&A. So if you see on the Zoom chat, there's a Q&A option where people can add their questions. I see we have one in already for Dr. San Martin, so I'll just read this out to you. It says, do you have any insights or suggestions into how protests against nitrogen policy, and when they have already arisen, and how they could be diffused or de-escalated in a constructive way, i.e. without government having to simply roll back its proposed policies, regulations, and without further resentment bubbling over in the future? So I think they mentioned they have in mind the farmer protests in Europe over the last few years. Yeah, so it's an easy question there for you, Dr. Martin.
Very, very easy. Thank you for the question. I putting the joke aside that it's not an easy question, I think it's a very important question, right? Because that's more or less the pattern, right? We're talking about this today and decided to focus my presentation on this because it's an emerging critical aspect of nitrogen governance, right? And I think social mobilizations and farmers' protests more specifically have created a space for a long time, right? Shaping agricultural practices and contesting state policies and also contesting kind of corporate power, right? So in that sense, it's not a new story, it's old. And in many episodes of this story, we have seen a similar approach where governments are forced to react right after the protests have emerged, right? What we learn from those lessons usually is that, of course, reacting is late, it's not ideal, but better outcomes tend to be linked to the ability of those in power to understand what are the grievances, what are the goals, what are the underlying motivations, right? Many, as I mentioned, many of these issues are not necessarily about the technical aspects of a particular policy, are based on other social concerns, right? So understanding those are critical before protests emerge, but also during that's happening, right? Because that provides, and again, thinking in terms of risk management or strategic approaches to deal with conflict, right? Because understanding those grievances or those motivations or goals give those in power the ability to fully negotiate and find common ground, right? If from the other side as well, right, we're able to find what are those underlying motivations, right? There's more chances to be able to find common ground. What that means in practice is that many times governments react by creating kind of panels, right? We're like bringing people to the table together to revise, right? That sometimes create an opportunity to create new dialogue, to open new windows, to legitimize and bring to the table those concerns and protests. I think operating within institutional channels is critical, and bringing those concerns early on is critical. If we are late to do that in the reaction process, doing that facilitates those kind of dialogues. Again, what I'm saying is very general and might sound kind of fictional, but I think each country has a long history of social movements and how the state and state actors have responded to them, right? In occasions using violence, and that of course is linked to a longer history of political cultures, right? How we manifest political opinions and disagreements, right? Now, I think each nation should look at those, right? And take their own lessons, right? What has worked in those particular contexts to deal with conflict and social mobilizations? What has ended up not in a good place, right? So that will be my invitation to start thinking about that. Thank you for the questions. Very, very, very important.
Yeah, no, thank you for that great answer, Dr. San Martin. It's yeah, I think as come up in lots of the talks, very context specific, and understanding that history is an important place to start to be able to know how you know that's sort of the history of protest and movements. Okay, I've got a question in the chat for Dr. Singh, but I actually think this could be interesting to hear from all our different speakers if they've got something else to add to this. But I'll start with Dr. Singh. So this is from Abbas Basir, but how can we engage all stakeholders with shared responsibility?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I would definitely wait for for other speakers also to join here. As a scientist, I feel that when I started working on this in this field, I feel that the knowledge we have as a scientist, that okay, this reactive nitrogen excess creates air quality problem, water. I think that's not very well penetrated to to different community, local community, especially the farmers. I feel that's based on my experience, and so when we talk about bringing all the stakeholders and discussing their shared responsibility, I think we need to think bringing them on some common platform, not like a physically, but giving them incentive, not necessarily economically, but in terms of the knowledge we have or the information we have, that what can be better done from their side. So for example, for farmers, that could be also actually giving incentives to choose sustainable practices, and choose not just based on the subsidy based on one particular nutrient, let's say urea or nitrogen in case of India. Also focus on different nutrients balanced. And then for agribusiness stakeholder, I would say that I think it's just for me it's difficult to understand. For me it's challenging to understand what could be the one platform to really discuss this for different stakeholders. But yeah, something like what I mentioned about the Krishi Vigyan Kendra in India, which actually brings a lot of discussion and community engagement at one place, where it's a science-based center, so on agriculture, where the scientist local institute will be actually connected to the farmers, local farmers, and also those information is going to the government. And so there is a way to do it, but I think I'll be very happy to take others also in this question.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. Yeah, would any of our other speakers like to come in?
I could add that it's important to clarify what the different roles of different stakeholders is. Like, for instance, from the consumer point of view, the role of consumers is to maybe shift diet and demand sustainable foods. The industry role would be to provide the sustainable foods and transparent labeling. Policymakers should create clear dietary guidelines and procurement guidelines. But also, I think it's important to acknowledge that different stakeholders have different interests. So I think that an important approach that we're trying to adopt here at the school in our studies is to use the approach of co-benefits. So for instance, if we're interested in health and try to promote health, well, show that if we improve health, there is a co-benefit on the environment. Or if we improve agricultural practices, that's good economically for the farmers, but there are also co-benefits for the health and health industry and for consumers. So using the co-benefit approach.
Yeah, good point. Thank you for that. Ms. Torodova, would you like to comment on this?
Thank you. I was thinking at the question and hearing the answers, and I also think that for different stakeholders, you have to use different instruments actually. Because, for example, with the public institutions, we have the public debates, and it's a very strict procedure, and it's followed by everybody. With the research institute, we are trying to involve them in our work, and also to bring them in our contracts and to go at the root level. And with farmers, we are involving them most of the time through the farmer organization, and is this informal part of the meeting. And so basically the information from them we are taking through the farmer organizations. We can't use a size fits all, let's say, and this, I think it works in our project.
Yeah, no,
Thank you.
another excellent point, that different mechanisms are suitable for engaging with different stakeholders in different ways. Thank you for that. Okay, we've got some other questions that have come in. So I'll just read this one out. I don't know who it quite goes to, but we'll see who wants to take it. Tools such as nitrification inhibitors can greatly reduce nitrous oxide losses and nitrate leaching, but do not always give economic returns to the grower. Can government and consumers be persuaded to incentivize mitigating methods rather than simply impose additional costs onto the farmers? So I don't know if anyone would want to take that question.
I think I just like to take that. I don't know if I can address completely, but and from my experience, I was working in Canada, and there used to be, I think their farmers, we were actually studying the emissions coming from urea applied feed, and especially ammonia. So we were looking at different fertilizers. So urea based, just urea and then mixed with inhibitors. So what I remember from that government actually giving farmers subsidy who are using those inhibitor based fertilizer. So in case of India, I think that neem coated urea, which I mentioned in my presentation, that's one of the actually motivation, apart from other actually not using urea for other purposes, completely using for agriculture. That was the main goal, to make neem coated urea. But I think there are a couple of studies coming up actually to understand when neem coated urea. So we have this tree neem, and their oil is coated on urea, and this slow down. That's the in theory, it slows down the emissions. And in India, it's 100%. You cannot get anything but neem coated urea only here. So we still, I think, as we still needs to understand what has its impact on the emissions, because there are mixed results. But yeah, I think the question was whether to give the incentive or to farmers who are using those. I think it's some countries are doing, at least Canada, I knew that, but I don't know others.
Thank you for that example. I don't know if anyone else had a comment to that particular question.
I can jump in very
Yeah,
quickly. So a few things come to my mind. So there are a few examples of what we call kind of cross compliance, right? When farmers will receive some financial support, right? But it's conditional upon meeting a specific kind of environmental standards, right? And I think there are different ways that we have seen where we're kind of combining specific environmental targets with a specific policies supporting, right, those transitions. And I think that's actually moving in the right direction. Some of the aspects that I see in some of the social mobilizations against agrarian policies, and it's very clear in the case of South Asia, is the feeling that there is no state support to kind of help farmers continue supporting their livelihoods, right? And I think that's an important aspect that we should be aware and consider when we're thinking about these cases. Of course, there are many different ways to do that, right? To combine that and to support livelihoods. And of course, there are better and worse ways to do it. But we have some examples already that are showing how some specific targets are always working with some targeted subsidies, right? Or any kind of technical or financial support. And we have learned from some cases, particularly thinking about small scale farmers, right? That what they need in terms of financial support or material support is not that much, right? Small actions can create a bigger change, right? So that's one of a couple of pathways that I will consider to try to answer that question.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, we've got another question that come in for Roberto. So what may be the share of nitrogen pollution during connection with food mileage, and how can that be addressed? Sorry, I think for the whole food system. Don't know if you quite.
Oh, thank you very much for the question. Actually, that's a problem that is very much felt. I come originally from Italy, where the slow food movement was created, and then there is this other part of it is there's a movement called Kilometro Zero, which means kilometer zero, which encourage people to consume food that is grown locally, precisely to reduce the transportation and reduce the pollution that comes, the air pollution that comes from transportation. Also because it doesn't really make sense sometimes to consume food that was grown on the other side of the world, or as I read sometimes some time ago, of salmon fished in the United States, shipped to China to be processed, and then shipped back to the United States to be consumed. That really doesn't make sense. But as far as I know, the contribution of transportation is not as big as the pollution generated on farms, in farms, and the pollution generated by food wasted or lost. So transportation is an important issue, but the other two are even bigger. How to address that? I would probably push on educating people on consuming locally grown food and food in season. Because of course, if we want to consume vegetables that are not in season, we need to import them from very far away. So educate people on consuming locally grown and in-season food. I hope that was the answer.
That's a good answer. Personal example there too. I've also got some questions here that and please do feel free to add more questions into the chat or into the Q&A. But yeah, no, I want to ask a question to Lavinia. So how do gender roles, so we talked about gender today and it came up in a few of the talks as well. So again, if others can answer to this too. But to Lavinia, how do gender roles within Romanian farming communities affect access to and participation in these training programs?
Thank you, Annie. Well, for women, women normally they work in the farm. They are responsible with the farm documents most of the time, so they are doing this administrative work. They also are taking care of the kids, and it's what we saw that is very important for them is to try to bring them to these informal meetings and to the trainings, because actually they are the ones that are persuade they are bringing innovation in their farms, because they are presenting to their husbands and agronomic engineers what they are finding, and they are more prone to, let's say, to novelties. Rather than what we saw that men are more sticking to what they are learning in the universities and their let's say like historical myths about fertilizers. So they are, because they are also touched more easily by the health issues because they have the kids. So what is important for them is to tailor the schedule for them to be able to participate, and to have meetings when only women are presented, because like that it's really easier to engage, because in the groups where we have women farmer and men farmer, what is happening most of the time is that a lot of percentage of the time it's allocated to the men speaking, and basically women, they don't share experiences, they don't participate. So yes, and they are the ones that are bringing novelties. We saw in the grants that they are convincing their let's say they are the person that they are working in the farm to go into the grants, because our grants gives they are not paid only for they don't receive money only to buy the equipment, but also to implement these knowledge transfer networks. So basically, for somebody that is sticking to the rules, it's very difficult to go into this. But the women really saw the opportunity, and they felt that they can be the host farmers for their farm. So that is this is what they are bringing to the table, let's say.
Thank you. Yeah, that's interesting to hear. I mean, Selma, as well, you were talking about some schemes in India as well, and just wondering how scalable those are for these kind of women leadership models, and what those conditions that are needed for success for other countries.
I think as Lavinia rightly mentioned, and I think that's very interesting to hear that even the women is not coming in forefront to participate and all, but still they are the core, and when it comes to innovation and coming up with the ideas. I think I would also say, I mean, we have this Andhra Pradesh, the southern state I mentioned. Example, which was self-help group led by women, and we have seen the success there. So I think it's because I mean it's personal. I mean, I think it's personal also when you think about in coming up with the innovative ideas, and I'm not biased for gender, but it's really when you come, it starts from the home. It's like from women is so important part of starting from food making to any decision making, if they given a chance to take that role and participate. So I think scalability, I think I feel you need to really give that opportunity and really make people feel inclusive, women feel inclusive, and take them the charge of and also one point I want to mention, that there are groups working already. There must be groups working. So I think it is really valuable to take the the traditional knowledge already going on, instead of building something new, whatever is going on, and then bringing them together. And so I think it's a scalable. It's just really not going to be easy fix, and it's going to be very straightforward.
Thank you for that. And that leads me actually nicely to a question that I had for Dr. San Martin. And it was, I mean, obviously, as you said, sort of high level, we have these ambitions for more equity and participation, and this all sounds good. But obviously, these things take time and resource. So what is kind of your message to governments under pressure to be able to act in these areas and to act quickly?
Thank you, and that's a great question. So something I would like to highlight is something I mentioned at the end of my presentation, which I think is the role of the local social experts, right? And here I'm using a broader concept, not social scientists necessarily, but social experts, right? Of course, there are social scientists in local universities and research institutions that know much better, right, and understand much better issues of social mobilization, the cultural social dimensions of agriculture in those particular areas, and have a better understanding at a subnational level or how those differences operate, right? And those experts are key assets, right, in these kind of situations, right? But also, I would like to highlight those experts on the social dimensions that are not necessarily scientists or scholars, right? Those are the people that directly work with farmers, right? People working on extension services, right? Other professionals that because of their functions, they have to work with farmers, right? They are also social experts and are key in understanding this kind of social foundations, right, of governance that I mentioned on my talk, right? So I would say those are easy actors to find. They are right there, very close to you. They're usually not part of discussions about policy design, although as I try to argue in my talk, they are critical, right? And that can become more critical, and it's also a good way to diversify the kind of knowledges that are part of decision-making processes, right? And what kind of knowledge is considered part of the system. That was my answer. I don't know if we have time, but I would love to mention something about the gender question that we were discussing before.
No,
That's
please do.
okay.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, so something that I wanted to mention, right, is that research on especially small-scale farmers in the developing world is very clear about the role of women, right? And that's essential, right? But I think something that I'm seeing more and more clear in studies looking at social mobilizations and protests, right? Looking at conflicts more than self-organized groups of farmers, right, is the role of masculinities, right, and rural masculinities, right, in kind of defining or shaping issues about identity, right. It's very clear in some studies looking at protests in Europe, right, where they usually take some kind of populist approach and creates this kind of recreate this kind of division between us and them, right? Creating this tension between kind of rural communities, rural masculinities, and urban identities, right? And in some cases, looking at EU level, right, between us and the EU kind of like leaders, right? That tends to be liberal, right? Tends to be urban, right? Tends to be far away and disconnected from what happens on the ground. And those kind of narratives are deeply embedded on issues of gender identities and usually linked to masculinities, right? And I think something that we should pay also more attention as we expect these kind of conflicts to continue emerging.
Well, thank you for that. Pichetti, got your hand?
Yeah. I wanted actually to connect with what William just said, because the same problem of masculinity, we can see that also on the dietary front, because there is this whole propaganda, let's say, that the actual manly food is a steak. And actually in another, when I was working in another institution, I had a colleague who proudly told me once that the only green thing in his refrigerator was spoiled food. So yeah, there is this masculinity role also in the dietary world, where plant-based foods are seen like feminine, while men only eat meat. So we should work also on that. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Actually, on the topic of meat, I did have a question for you, Roberto, too. It was just how can governments overcome then? I mean, you're talking about this gender, identity. I don't know the way that people identify in terms of eating meat, but I mean just that overall sort of cultural resistance to reducing meat eating. Just wanted to comment a bit more on that.
Well, I would say that the first thing is to really educate people on the health consequences of eating too much meat. And in the West, in the developed world, we're eating way too much meat, so we should reduce it. And sometimes it takes just a little effort, like Meatless Mondays. It's just 1 day a week. And then maybe from there, people would see that, well, 1 day is okay. I could actually add a second day. It's not a big sacrifice. But also, I would say that it's important that we don't ban types of food, because if, for instance, we ban meat, then we have the opposite reaction. People resent that and want to eat meat. So it's about making other foods, alternative foods, plant-based foods, more available, more affordable, and making them more desirable, so that people would see the alternative and be drawn to it with the proper kind of communication. And then the consumption of meat could possibly decrease. But it's true that in certain, let's say, certain populations, I mean, we cannot take away meat completely. It's a source of protein that they need. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I can sort of draw similarities with what we're talking about with nitrogen and other kind of nitrogen, efficient interventions in the same way that you're talking about diet as well, just to create the right information around it, the right incentives. It's not about bans, it's about raising that awareness.
It's a slow process. So we need to be patient, but we need to be patient, but it can be done. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so we're almost coming to an end. I think I've got maybe time for another question that I actually wanted to put to Salma, to Dr. Singh, sorry. And it was just about the rural-urban divide that you mentioned previously. So, and it seems obviously relevant globally for this. So how can policymakers break this cycle to create more sort of collaborative approaches around sustainable nitrogen management?
Yeah, I think this is very interesting for me as well, that whenever I'll start with giving an example that in India and actually in Indo-Gangetic Plain, so starting from northwest to eastern part of India, and we have Punjab and Haryana state in upwind of Delhi, and we have stubble burning issue. And every time this stubble burning, I'm just giving this one example, stubble burning issue start in October post monsoon and something, we start, this become a news, and it's like, we are talking about why farmers are not doing this, and then the city people, and I mean, I consider myself living in Delhi for a decade actually. It used to be such a problem that the immediate attention would go that why we do not have the solution. Then immediately that polarization, thinking about that, why farmers are not listening to government and all of that. So I think this has a even deeper issue, that just not providing the solution, also thinking as a farmer's perspective, is also not helping. That they are actually, they want their field to be get ready for the next crop. Yes, there are also issues, but I think that the clear communication also is a very key role here, that from the government side or from the different stakeholders we discussed. I think that having a clear communication and making the invisible visible is very important in this dialogue and in this conversation. Yeah, I think I would say that. Yeah.
Thank you. No, that's perfect. Yeah, good communication is needed to understand these different interests and viewpoints and experiences. So with that, I'll closing our session. So I'll pass over to Dr. Ning Liu to give the closing remarks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Annie. On behalf of UNEP, I would like to extend our sincere appreciation to the distinguished speakers, Dr. Annie Yang, Dr. Soumya Singh, Ms. Lavinia Todorova, Dr. Robert Pizzetti, and Dr. William Sanmartin for sharing their valuable insights on the social dimensions of nitrogen management. Special thanks to Dr. Yang for her leadership in preparing this technical session. Addressing nutrients pollution is one of the 5 priorities of the upcoming 7th session of the United Nations Environment Assembly. Given the fragmented nature of nitrogen, the nutrients governance, there is an urgent need to coordinate policy interventions at the national, regional, and the international levels. UNEP looks forward to working closely with the government agencies, academia, the private sector, NGOs, and the media to promote holistic and sustainable approaches to nutrients management. As the Secretariat of the UNEP Working Group on Nitrogen, we remain committed to collaborating with scientists around the world to share knowledge and advance effective nitrogen management practices. With that, I conclude this technical session. Thank you all for your active participation. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
You.